All right, so this is my presentation on stuff that I've picked up over the past 6 or 8 months or so working with my independent SaaS called RailsDevs. And I wanted to consolidate all of that into some secrets on tips that I've seen that help developers kind of land their first Rails job in the industry, and also what businesses are really looking for when they're starting to hire. So this is ideally, if you have questions, just pop it in the chat, or and I'll get those passed on to me and I can answer them during the presentation. And if not, feel free to hold it to the end. We can do a round of Q&A. So just a little bit about me. My name's Joe Mazzalotti. I've been doing Rails since 2012. I, like a lot of us, got started in JavaScript like way back when, right out of college, and just like really hated it, and ended up wanting to try to change that up. So I interviewed at Pivotal Labs, where I worked with Mike D'Alessio, who's now a Shopify engineer an engineer manager at Shopify, knowing like zero Rails. And some of the tips that I picked up there are stuff that I'm going to share today, because I didn't know anything about Rails when I got started. I was brand new to it. I knew JavaScript, I knew iOS, and that was it. Nowadays, I focus on Turbo Native and iOS. That's kind of my sweet spot. I can kind of take your Rails app and port it to iOS with Turbo Native. I also blog on mazzalotti.com. I run the Hotwire Dev newsletter, which went out this morning, which is super exciting. Just broke 2,000 subscribers, like literally today. So first to hear it here. And I just kind of aggregate all the links about Hotwire in the past month and share them with my followers there. And finally, I'm the founder of RailsDevs, which I will talk about more at the end, but it is a platform that I've built personally on Rails for Rails developers to find Rails jobs, both part-time and full-time. So let's dive in. Secret number one, learn to market yourself. This is something that is not controversial, because it's not. Like, you want to learn how to market yourself, but this isn't like go shout who you are from the top of the mountaintops. This is learn how to market your unique skills as a human, not a Rails developer, but as a human. So the first step there is, what unique non-Rails skills do you have? Maybe you're getting into Rails for the first time. Maybe you're a junior who is migrating from a different language or a different career. Talk about that stuff when you talk about yourself. All of those skills are relevant when coming to a new job, especially in Rails, where a lot of the work that you're doing, the hardest part of the work that you're doing, is not writing the code, it's translating what people need into code. So if you were a paramedic for the past 5 years, you know how to talk to people really well. You can translate that into how you talk about yourself, both in your resume and your cover letters and your Twitter profiles and all that good stuff. This includes your interests and learnings. Just because you like chess doesn't mean that it's something that you can't talk about during your your interview process or how you market yourself. I'm super into board games, and I tie a lot of that into the blog posts that I write by using board games as examples, by building APIs or fake APIs that deal with board games, because they're really good examples to follow. And it kind of becomes like a little theme throughout all of my my work, that board games are involved. And I think that just kind of sets you apart, because it makes you a unique person and gives you personality and not just another Rails dev on the stack. Next up is talking about your achievements and your accomplishments. Kind of, stuff that we've heard before, but achievements and accomplishments don't have to be, I solved this hard problem in Rails, or I got us to X MRR. It could be really exciting things about what you want to learn, or what you struggled with as a developer individually for a while that you now are really good at, or even passable at. And those are the type of things that are important to hiring managers and CTOs if you're looking at a smaller company, because it shows that you're willing to grow and your willingness to learn. And that, for a junior, can sometimes be more important than the skills you actually know. And finally, on this, I want to emphasize how important your cover letter is more than your resume. Odds are your resume is going to be either fairly thin, or there's not going to be a lot of relevant experience on it. And that's why I really push that you spend a lot of time building out just a bulletproof cover letter. Not one that you copy and paste to every single employee or potential employer, but one that you tweak to every single application that you apply to tell why you are the perfect fit for this particular role. Cover letters are the first thing someone reads, and a lot of times the only thing that someone reads. If they don't like your cover letter, they're not going to read your resume. So you got to put your best foot first, and really nail that cover letter. I'll have some more tips at the end of this on what folks look for in their cover letter. But for now, keep that in mind. Secret number 2, find your niche or your niche, however you want to pronounce it. I think both are right. I usually say niche, so I'm going to roll with that. What do I mean by your niche? I mean something that makes you unique. What do you love about something in Rails or in the ecosystem? So what I usually say is pick an interest and dive deep into it. If you've heard my name before, you probably recognize that I do turbo native stuff or iOS, or maybe you do recognize stuff that I do with hiring. I've picked those explicitly as my niche, and I've dove into those deep. I've learned everything that I can about them. I've become an expert in the space, and that's my brand. That's my personal kind of aura, and that's how I market myself, tying back to secret number 1. Make it memorable, make it unique. This is where I start to talk about, like, don't say that you're the Rails, I do ERB. Unless you're going to dive so deep into ERB that you're going to find bugs in ERB and submit pull requests, and you're all over that for performance. Like, make it memorable, make it unique. Something that's maybe hasn't been done before is ideal. I get a lot of pushback on this because people say, well, I don't know anything about, I'm new to Rails. How am I supposed to know? Well, you don't need to be an expert just yet. You will be. If you stick with it long enough, you will become an expert. It might take you 10 years to become the expert. It took Nate Bergerpeck how many years to become the Rails performance expert before people started recognizing that? But he didn't start off being that. He had to build it up over time. I didn't start off knowing everything about Turbo Native. I had to learn all of it over time. So pick something that interests you, because you're probably going to be working with it for a very long time. Finally, how to communicate this with people. Scream this off the top of the mountaintops. Blog about it, contribute to open source software, launch projects. Everything you do, so find some way to tie it back to this niche that you found, and this little slice of Rails, or this little slice of the development world that you want to share with people, and become the accessibility gal or the deploying on render guy. Like, become the person who, when they see your name, they associate it with the X person or the Y person. It goes a really long way, and you can start to build that up right away by just putting it in your Twitter profile. No one checks those and makes sure if you're lying or you're accurate. Start there and then become that person over time. One more comment on this is that just because this is your niche, this is your focus, it's not where you're going to spend 100% of your time. You will still need to learn everything else about Rails that is relevant, but this is your focus. This is kind of like if you had a big iceberg underwater, this is the top that you talk about all the time. It's still supported by all of your experience in the real world and building out Rails applications. Secret number 3, connect with everyone. I really, really emphasize this one because it's how I got my career started, and it's how I've grown my career and how I've grown my audience. Just talk with everyone you possibly can. Email your favorite podcast hosts, DM people you follow on Twitter, go to meetups, talk to everyone, go to conferences, join online communities, do everything you can to increase your luck surface area by just expanding your network as wide and as far as you possibly can. The more people you know, the higher chance you have of them recommending you to someone who's hiring, or them hiring themselves, or them meeting you on a project that's going to elevate your career, or them saying, hey, remember that person I was talking about, the person who does accessibility? Yeah. Here's their Twitter profile, because you've been talking about accessibility for the past 6 months. That's the sort of relationships that you can start to foster when you are just open and out there and pretend that you're an extrovert. I'm not an extrovert. I get very much happiness from being alone on my computer, but I can pretend to be an extrovert in public. And it's a really good way to just kick the, pretend that you're not, and just try to talk to people. Like, it might be hard, but that's really the beauty about kind of everyone being online right now. You can craft that open DM 600 times before you send it. When you meet someone in person, you got half a second to come up with that one line that they're going to remember you. So take the time, reach out to people, and don't be afraid of not getting a response. You might send 12 DMs and one person responds. That's fine. That might happen. It's not like job applications, though. People are usually a little bit nicer on Twitter. But I don't recommend going and DMing someone with 50,000 followers who you know is not going to respond to you. Start small. Start with someone in your circle. Branch your way out. Connect with people. Don't blindly pick people to just randomly, get in contact with. One of the really cool examples of this is that my first job as a freelancer ever was from someone cold DMing me, like inbound cold DMing, and was like, hey, you've been talking about this TurboLinks thing. Can you build it for us? I was like, sure, let's give it a try. That was 4.5 years ago, almost 5 years ago at this point. And it literally kickstarted my career into doing Turbo Native for like 10 different clients and launching them into the App Store over the past 5 years. So that's an inbound lead, yes, but it started with a cold DM to me. One more thing on this is like, don't ask for a lot in that DM or that email or that whatever. Just be a genuine person. Just be a human. Be nice to them. Congratulate them on something they recently launched. All you're trying to do is foster a relationship. You're not trying to ask for anything. If you can offer some help in some reason and say, hey, that recent blog post was great, but this paragraph was super confusing. I wish it touched more on this, or this open source library is really cool, but like, is it possible if it did this? Here's a PR. That's a really good way to get your foot in the door because it shows that you care and you actually put the time in. No one likes when you get a cold DM that is clearly copy and pasted. Do not do that, please. I'll still respond to you, but I'll tell you and I'll call you out on it. And some other people are not going to be as nice and you might get blocked. A quick list of communities, if you're not aware of them. I'm big in the Go Rails Discord. There's a Rails contributing Discord now as well that has opened up as of like 2 days ago, the general channel to just general chat about Rails. There's also a Hotwire Discord, including one on channel or whatever on Stimulus, on Turbo, and on upcoming Strata, hopefully. And then there's always like the Slack and Discords in your local communities. Okay. 2 more secrets left. Secret number 4. Get really good at reading other people's code. Why? You'll end up over the course of your career reading way more code than you write. Think about it this way. You sit down to your computer, you do Rails new, and you run a scaffold. So you got a controller method, maybe you got a view. You didn't write that code, but you generated it. The first thing you're going to go do is read that code. The first thing you're going to do is read the code. You didn't even write it. Let's pretend you didn't use a scaffold. Let's say you just do a Rails new and you open up a configuration file, the production application configuration file. That's all code that you didn't write, that you don't have to read and understand and change. Let's take it a step further. You create a new endpoint. You write your controller method, you write your view, you write your model. You only write it once and then you never have to worry about it again. It works forever, right? You never have to think about it. If you think that's true, then you're very wrong and probably have a wrong opinion about programming, but you're going to read that code probably 10, 15, 100 times just in that like session before you actually start understanding how to modify it, how to change it. Get really good at reading code. It will help you learn way faster than just writing code all the time. So what do you read? How do you find code to read? Read documentation, read open source code, find your favorite gems that are like a little bit smaller surface area, dive into how they work, dive into the decisions that were made, look at the past PRs, see why different architecture were changed. Or if you're really feeling up for it, dive into the Rails source code. I recommend this over like the Ruby source code because Ruby is going to have C interoperability, and learning C while you're learning Ruby and Rails is like very hard. I wouldn't recommend it, but Rails at least is going to be like mostly Ruby, HTML. I think there's some CSS, but very little, and maybe a tiny bit of JavaScript in there. But learn how Active Record dynamically creates like a scope method. Learn how when you inherit from application record, what does that actually mean for your code base? Learn how when you run a migration on a DB migrate, what does that code even exist? When I do Rails DB migrate, where does that code start? How do you find that? Learning how to read code like that is going to be huge when you get your first job, because everyone expects a senior to be able to dive in and just start coding on their first day. That's not really expected of a junior. But if you can change that expectation and show that you're going to be able to start being productive on day one because you know how to read code really well, you're off to a great start. And you already have a leg up on the competition. If you're stuck, don't know what to do next, you're confused, find a mentor and find a sponsor. What's the difference here? A mentor is someone who is going to help you level up your coding skills, level up your, maybe touch on your resume, maybe they will review your code, help you write a PR. A sponsor is going to be the one that's saying, hey, there's this job that I know about that looks perfect for you. Can I make an introduction? Or, you know that you've been struggling with Active Record recently? Here's a course on Active Record that you should really check out. And I know I have a 20% off coupon or something. They're the person that's going to level up your career versus your skills. That's the way I like to think about it. And how do you find those? Back to secret number 3, connect with everyone. If you have a big network, you're going to be able to find people that are willing to offer advice to you when you need it. And sometimes that relationship will be paid. There's no problem in paying someone to help you. It will be a huge return on your investment, believe me. Even if you're paying someone $1,000 a month, you're going to make more than $1,000 a month at your first Rails job. I can guarantee that. So all you need to do is work there for a month to pay that person back. But don't be afraid to offer compensation if someone is pressed for time or you really value their opinion. Finally, on this topic, always share what you learn. Think about every time that you learn something new, you can't find a tutorial for it online. What do? You Google it, right? Maybe you find on Stack Overflow. Maybe you see a video on YouTube from Mix and Go. Maybe you see something in a newsletter recently. But what if you can't? What if there's nothing out there that exists for your exact skill level? But then you learn it on your own. Pretend that you were yourself before you learned it. What type of article would you want to exist on the web? What type of tutorial? What type of video? Open source code? And build it. Create that on your own and share it with the world. Because if you are confused about how to start, there's going to be hundreds, if not thousands, of other people that are also in the same boat as you. And to be able to help them is a really good start in building up your name as secret number 2, which is finding your niche and being able to talk about all that stuff you were really interested in. One more note on that is that be respectful of your connections' time. Don't go in there and ask for someone for help. This kind of go back to secret number 3. But on sharing what you learn, you don't need to always share something that you learned on your own or on your free time or while you were doing your freelance work or your side project. You can share what you learned at your full-time job or even if it is proprietary code. Yeah, don't copy and paste your code into a blog post and be like, look what I learned today. But it's not going to be that difficult to take that code, make it more abstract, make it more general, and able to share with the public. It's also going to make it more readable because you don't have a lot of domain logic built up. That's a really good way to start your blog, is like, I learned this at my job today or this week. Here's how you could do it too. I'm really a big fan of like the TIL, like today I learned type posts. And they do really well on Twitter too. Last secret is that, sadly, applying to jobs is a numbers game. It only takes one yes on both parties to actually land a job. This isn't like when you're consulting or freelancing where you need to have a new client maybe every couple of months to keep the lights on. You find a full-time job, odds are you will stay there for as long as, not as long as you want. Sometimes bad things happen. Look at Shopify the past few days. But for a very long time, or at least until you want to make a change. So think about it this way. If you have a 1% chance of signing a contract with someone every time you send your resume out there, send 100 resumes. You might, that's the odds of large numbers, or that's actually the odds of small numbers, which doesn't exist. But my point is that if you're looking at it as a numbers game, you need to make a lot of applications because your chances as a junior are much smaller than the chances as a senior. That's the way it is. But how can you improve your chances? How can you take that from 1% to 5 or 10 or maybe even 15%? Don't get discouraged. Recognize before you apply that you're probably going to get turned down from a lot of companies. That's okay. That's okay. Getting a job as a junior is very hard. I'm not going to pretend that it isn't. But it also shows that sometimes that company isn't ready for a junior developer. If you get an offer letter or if you are interviewing and you're like, what's your process for mentoring junior developers? And they're like, oh, I don't know. We only have one senior dev. That's probably not a really good place to grow as a junior developer. You want to go somewhere that has a practice in place that will help you level up your skills as a junior to mid-level to senior over the years. And that starts with having some sort of curriculum or practice in place by the company. So just because you got to know, it might not be you, it might be the company. On that note, every time you get rejected, follow up asking why. Follow up 2 times, follow up 3 times. If you can, get a reason why you were rejected. Because every time someone says no to you, they're going to give you a list of reasons, hopefully. Those reasons can be turned into benefits for your next application. If it's like, hey, they don't have enough experience, get more experience. If they're like, hey, you don't know how to do algorithms, learn algorithms better. If they're like, well, yeah, but English skills weren't that great, written communication wasn't good, take a course on writing in tech. Like, there are things you can do to improve your outcome for the next application. And on that note, just because you apply somewhere and get rejected once doesn't mean you can't apply there ever again. Wait a few months, maybe wait a year. If the application is still open at like a big company, you can usually reapply. Also, hiring managers want to hire developers. Their job is to hire developers. If you ask them, hey, when's the next time that I can apply? They might say, look, we open up the application every 3 months. Apply next next quarter. And you now have a relationship with that hiring manager or that recruiter, and it all starts to snowball again. It goes back to the previous secret of building your network out and not getting discouraged and increasing your luck surface area there. So just reading over my notes here. Yeah, ask why. And something that's not on here, but kind of ties back to the cover letter. Have a snippet that you can copy and paste for your cover letter. That's like the chunk of who you are, but then pad it out with actually why you're the perfect fit for the current company, because those are 2 very different things. But who you are as a developer is different than how you market yourself for a particular role. Back to secret number 1. Okay, so I have 2 more slides here. There's a little bonus secret that I threw in, and it's how can I help you? How me right here can help everyone in this room, not today, but over the next couple of weeks or the next couple of months as you start applying. Here's my promise to you. Send me your resume. Email your resume. Say, I've been struggling. I don't know how to do this. Please help me with that. I'll review your resume for you. Send me your RailsDev profile. We haven't talked about RailsDevs yet, but send it to me. I will help you through it and help you refine that. DM me something that you blogged about, your new open source app that is in Rails. I'll retweet your content to my followers. I'll start increasing your luck surface area for you. I'll start making those connections for you, or at least the first step in them. And finally, if you have something open source, I will review your open source code and offer 1 bit of architecture feedback or some README feedback that will help you level up that repository or level up that skill set. So before we dive into Q&A, I am going to stop this share. And what I'm going to do is pop open just a browser really quick and show you what RailsDevs is and why I think it's so important right now. So as you can see here, RailsDevs is a reverse job board for Rails developers. I built this because I think the hiring process is broken in not only Rails, but in tech in general. Instead of you submitting your resume to companies and then like hoping that you hear back, instead you submit your profile to RailsDevs and then developers reach out to you. So my developer profile looks like this. Look, there's tip number 3, right? Find your niche. I'm the Turbo Native guy. That's how I market myself. Here are all of the things that I can do for your website or how I can help you. And if I was a business, right here, this button would just be hire me. And what does that do? I can just send you a message. I can reach out to you as the business directly and ask you for help or send you a cover letter, or sorry, a job description. That's like the whole thing. It's switching the role of the developer business, the hiree, the hirer dynamic in putting the responsibility on the business. And it's really important to me because it empowers the developer to be the person who is in charge of the conversation. No longer are you submitting your resume into the void and hoping for the best. You're putting yourself out there for businesses to find you, and it's up to them to find the perfect developer. So, like I said, I will tweak your resume, help you with that. I'll help tweak your profile on RailsDevs to help you look more appealable to developers or to businesses that are hiring. And I'll also make sure to connect you with anyone on the platform that is looking for someone in your position. That wraps up the keynote there. God,
that was amazing.
So that wraps up most of what I wanted to talk about. I'm happy to open up to Q&A now. And then I have just one more slide at the end where, just like how to reach me, how to contact me with all that good stuff. But yeah, Q&A, this is a great time, I think, for Q&A.
Awesome. So if everyone, if you have questions, you can either unmute yourself and talk, or just put the question in the chat, and we can take it from there. But in the meantime, I have a few questions for you, Joe. So you mentioned doing outreach for different roles, but I was wondering, is there a specific company profile that's looking for juniors? Like, are there more startups that are looking for juniors, or are there more companies with 50 or 200 employees that are hiring more juniors than everybody else? So I was wondering if you have any insights on that.
So remember that I'm working with like a very small portion of businesses in the grand scheme of like the Rails hiring world. So most of my experience with businesses is going to be more anecdotal. That said, I don't recommend a junior go to a company that only has a small handful of developers at this point. I think that you might get in and be in way over your head, which isn't the end of the world. But if they don't have a system in place to help you grow as a developer, if they don't have a curriculum or an onboarding process or a mentorship like practice in place, it's going to be very hard for a junior, in my opinion, to thrive at a company. When I got my first developer job, again, at Pivotal Labs, like I had a mentor that I met with every single week that talked to me about like problems that I was having, what's confusing. We dove into code some days. We talked about soft skills other days. Like that's the type of stuff that you need in place. And it's much harder for a very small startup to have those as they ramp up their developers. So personally, I think that it's better to look for a larger company as a junior, or something in like the mid-level. Maybe there's already 10 devs on the team and 4 of them are seniors, 5 of them are seniors. They can help you level up your career.
You also mentioned this tactic about writing stuff, writing blog posts, posting on Twitter and things like that. But what I have noticed is that a lot of people are looking for a job right now or as fast as possible, and they're kind of hoping to learn the skills on the job. So I think a lot of the people have heard that coding jobs pay well and they want to jump in right away. Do you have any advice for them?
Yeah, I think that goes back to the first slide that I presented, where you need to market yourself as someone who is willing to learn, as someone who is excited to learn and has the like appetite to really dive into something and be a sponge and absorb everything that someone is teaching you. And it's a little bit harder to say that without just sounding like, hire me and I'll figure it out, because you need to prove that you can figure it out. So there's a way to show examples of yourself figuring it out by, maybe you took a bootcamp course, maybe you have a project where you like can show, here's how I started, and this is V1, here's all how crappy the code is, and here's V2 and it's great, and it's here's all the cool things that I did, or here's all the tests that I added, or here's all the optimizations that I made, and show someone, here's the progress that I've done. I think that goes a long way in showing companies and businesses like, okay, this person is not only knows what they're talking about, but this person is genuine and honest about what I can expect from them.
Yeah. So someone asks, how would you advise? How would your advice change if someone wanted to start freelancing?
Great question. So my journey has been that I was full-time for 8 years, something like that, less than 10 years, full-time. Before I got my first freelancing gig, I freelanced for about 2 years while working full-time. And then last year in 2020, January, I went freelancing, independent, whatever you want to call it, full-time. So my journey has kind of been a soft transition. I didn't stop and start the freelancing stuff. And I think that this is actually advice that would apply to anyone who wants to get into freelancing, not just developers. I don't recommend being like, okay, I'm going to quit my job and tomorrow I'm going to start freelancing, because you're going to have a really hard time finding clients if you try to go from 0 to 60 overnight, and you're going to be really stressed. Maybe you have some money saved up where you can be like, hey, I can not work or not get paid for 6 months. But now you have a ticking time bomb that in 6 months, if you don't have a job or a client, you got to go back to work, and then you got to start applying, and then it might take 6 months to find a job. So my actual advice there is that see if you can freelance on the nights and weekends. See if you can moonlight a freelancing role. Maybe it's only 2 hours a week. Maybe it's 5 hours a week. See if you can dedicate some time while not distracting from your full-time job, doing a little bit of freelancing work with a client. This has a ton of benefits because you're building rapport with the client. So when you do go freelance, you could say, hey, I'm freelance full-time now. Like, let's ramp up my hours, or let's ramp up my project. You have a connection in the industry who can connect you to other people. You have a much smaller risk if freelancing doesn't work out, because you can just continue your full-time job. You also kind of test the waters without having to dive in. Maybe you hate freelancing. It's not for everyone. You have to really, really good about being your own boss and like finding clients and doing sales and doing marketing and doing everything. And maybe that's not for you, and that's fine. Better to learn it while you still have a job that can support you and potentially your family than diving in head first and like kind of failing. My caveat to all of that is that if you don't have a job at all, freelancing is a really good way to prove your skills without or before you get a full-time job. So maybe you're just out of school, or you are trying to change careers and you're unemployed right now. Freelancing is a good way to build up your portfolio, build up that like blog, be able to show off some of the things that you've built without having to get the buy-in from a company to hire you full-time, and can be a really good way to get your foot in the door by saying, hey, I built this thing for this client and this other thing for this client, and they all work in Rails, and like, this is my experience. I don't have full-time development experience, but I have all of these cool projects on my portfolio. That's a really good way to just like kickstart that conversation.
Yeah. And can people use Rails jobs for freelancing clients, or just full-time?
Yeah, so RailsDevs was actually started for freelancers only. This was about, I think it was like October of last year. I had like too many leads. I couldn't work with everyone. And they were like, do you have any recommendations for, other freelancers? And I was like, here's this Google sheet of 30 Rails developers, and ended up connecting a bunch of people with jobs. And finally one night I was like, this is silly. There's a business here. Like I can automate a lot of this process and not have to manually connect people. And I think that night, the first commit to RailsDevs was made, and the whole marketing around it was that it was for freelancers only. And then I started to realize that, holy crap, I can freelancing is great. I can change lives with freelancing, but I can really change companies and really change developers' lives by giving them a full-time job. And that's where the transition into full-time went. And now you can do both. So businesses can hire for freelancers, contractors, or full-time developers.
Awesome. So I got another question. So again, if anybody wants to ask questions, either in the chat or unmute yourself and you can talk. So Virante asks, how to successfully grow your skill on freelance projects?
How to successfully grow your skill? So I'm going to answer this in 2 different ways based on my interpretation of the question. One is like, how do you grow as a freelancer, and how do you grow skills that make you a good freelancer? So the first one is that whenever I get a project as a freelancer, I want to make sure that it's either just out of my comfort zone or so deep in my comfort zone that I'm the expert in it and I will just nail the project and I can charge more for that. The projects where I'm the expert on and I can charge a ton for are the turbo native stuff. It's like, I've done this. I've done this for tons of companies. I've launched people into the App Store in 7 weeks. Like, you're going to pay top dollar because I am the best at what I do. And that's how I market myself. But when I want to grow, I will charge a little bit less and set that expectation and say, hey, I am really good at, turbo native, but your project actually wants to work with this new technology I've never done with, maybe OAuth. So if you don't mind me learning a little on the job, maybe it goes a little bit slower, maybe the code isn't perfect, I'll give you a discounted rate for that work. That works really well because, for me, in my experience, because you set the expectation that you might not be writing the best code for that because you don't have the experience in it. You're leveling up your skills because you're able to do things that are new and exciting and grow, and businesses get a discount. So it's a win-win in my book. So I usually will pitch that. I do that less now because I kind of stay in my comfort zone with turbo native because it works so well, and I have a list of companies that are trying to work with me. But when I was just getting started, I would use that technique a lot. How to grow successfully as a freelancer. First thing to do, get a website and learn how to market yourself on it. I don't mean download Jekyll or like build a Rails SaaS that's just your website. I mean, like, go to card.com or something and build one that you can launch in like an hour, or a Shopify website. This does not need to be pretty. It does not need to be written in Rails yet. And you just need to get something out there, because what matters way more is the copy and the marketing that you use and the positioning, not if it's built on Rails or if you have 100% on Lighthouse. You can always convert it to something later as a fun project, but that's not the goal. And you're going to get distracted. Believe me, you will get distracted. My website is still built on Jekyll, which I love, but I've been meaning to convert to Bridgetown for the past like 6 months. And it's just like, it's not a priority. People love it. It works. I know how the workflow works. I can blog and have a blog post in an hour. Why would I want to change that? So I encourage you to do the same. Oh, my website's also open source. You can fork it, and you now have a Jekyll website with all the content and everything. I don't know, change the logo, and now you have a blog. So.
Awesome. Ahmed asked, what must I know to become a strong junior candidate? Or what are employers looking for in a junior candidate in terms of skills?
Yeah, skills. I think that the skills are more softer skills for junior developers than they are for something that was more senior. The idea with a junior is that you're going to join and learn on the job, like we talked about earlier. And you need to get your foot in the door and say that I am a sponge. I will pick up everything that is taught to me. I can apply it quickly. I can communicate clearly. And I am someone who is a pleasure to be around and can just contribute in multiple ways that is outside of code. So how do you level up those skills? I don't know, watch the presentation. Like, I think that like the big one is marketing yourself. The big one is being able to communicate what you're really good at already, not just the skills, the development skills that maybe you don't have. Particular companies will look for different things, but I think that a lot of it is like, can you grow as a developer while you're here, and can you learn on the job, and are you fast on your feet? One more note on that is that companies will often say that they want a mid-level engineer, or sorry, say that they want a junior engineer, and then list like 3 years of experience and you need to know all these technologies. Always look at a job description as the ideal stretch, not as the minimum requirements. If you are almost at requirements, or you only have 6 of the 8 listed requirements, apply. What's the worst that could happen? They say no, and you learn why you didn't get in. That's a win. Yeah, it'll take some time, like that, time cost of money and all that stuff, but apply, learn why you didn't get in, because at best case, you get a job that's, you're shooting over your pay grade a little bit maybe, or what you think your pay grade is, and now you have a job you can grow into instead of a job that you're overqualified for.
Yeah. Another question related to this is, do I need to know testing, or what do QA engineers do? And isn't that their job?
So a QA engineer's job, yes, is testing. Not all companies have QA engineers. And I think, in my opinion, that every single developer, Ruby, Rails, Elixir, Swift, Android, every single developer in the world should know how to write tests for their own code. You don't need to be an expert at testing to write tests. You don't even need to write good tests to start. But if you show that you're interested in testing and you're willing to learn how to write tests, it goes much further than being like, yeah, my code works, someone else will figure it out. That's someone else's responsibility. No, it's your responsibility. You should never submit code that you think works but don't have proof that it works. And tests are the perfect way to do that. When I open up a new repo for the first time, I read the README, and the first directory I pop into is test or specs, depending on if it's RSpec or a mini test. Because I know that in there, well, first, do they exist? Because if they don't, I'm probably not inclined to check it out. But if they do, it's a really good indication of seeing how the code is structured without having to dive into the code. And learning, how does this person think how their app works? Because if you don't have tests, it's all in your head. And you can't transfer that knowledge without writing it down. And when you write it down, it's immediately out of date. So tests are the only way to keep that up to date and accurate, and a way to show and prove that your code works. So that was a little bit of a tangent on that, on why tests are great. I apologize, but you don't need to know tests. I would strongly encourage it. You probably should. And no, it's not the QA's job to test your code. It's the QA's job to make sure that the code that you edit doesn't break other stuff.
Yeah, that's amazing advice. I have a strong passion about tests, so I won't comment on this, but that just what Joe said is amazing advice for when you're beginning. How much your mindset changed when you transitioned from full-time to freelance? What was the biggest challenge?
The biggest challenge transitioning is that as a full-time developer, most of the time, most jobs, you can focus almost entirely on writing code. Maybe you get requirements doc from your manager or the PM. They say, hey, build this thing. Like, okay, cool. And you build it, and submit the pull request, and you move on to the next ticket. And you build the thing, and you move on to the next ticket. And people love that. Like, that's how I love that at the beginning of my career too. I just wanted to write code all day, all day, all day. Then I started to realize that I actually like to figure out design a little bit. Maybe that color doesn't make sense, or this border should be more rounded to pop off the page. Then I learned that I actually really like product, and I like to figure out the best flow for someone to work through an application. And I learned that I like marketing a little bit. And like all of these things, some jobs will let you progress through those. But the best way to do it, in my opinion, is to do it on your own, is to be a freelancer, is to be a solopreneur, which is what I like to call myself. Build your own app, because when you build your own app on your own, you have to do everything. You have to set up your DNS. You have to deploy to Heroku or Render. You have to build your landing page. You have to figure out your positioning. You have to talk to people on the phone and do sales. And that's super scary. All those things are like, I just want to write code. But I've fallen into the mindset that I really love all that stuff. And it turns out I'm not that bad at it. And like RailsDevs is proof, right? Like it's working. I found product market fit. And my business that I do consulting with is supporting me and my family along with my wife's income. Like the two of us together are killing it. And it's because we like things that aren't just, it's shown me that I can do more than just write code. And that transition, that mentality shift in my head was really big because, you're a beginner. I was a beginner for a long time at all of that stuff. I'm still a beginner at sales. I consider myself like level 2 at marketing, not level 1. But a sales call or like a product or a customer interview, very new to me, very scary, but I'm excited to learn and grow into that. And I think that's what powers my drive with it, is that I just want to learn everything. I want to absorb all of it. I want to still be that sponge. And that's really fun for me. Doing stuff like this is really awesome. So.
Learn more about customer research interviews, I think there's an amazing book called The Mom Test. If you want to learn about that, The Mom Test is your book.
I think I have the PDF, sadly, but it would be right there.
Yeah.
My marketing section. Deploy Empathy is another great book on interviewing customers. It's on my nightstand right now because I'm still reading it. But yeah, also, this is a great book. This is my favorite book on positioning. Obviously Awesome by April Dunford. Yeah. It is one of the coolest books ever on like figuring out how to talk about your business, but also yourself. Really cool stuff. I definitely recommend that. It's like my favorite nonfiction book in like the business space.
Yeah, all these skills kind of apply to jobs as well, because you need to talk to people in the business, and so they speak that language. Another question: I have some great experience in Ruby, but usually I forgot what I've implemented in past jobs. What's the best way to remember the algorithm developed in the past? Also, how to keep us updated with new things in Ruby on Rails?
I'll start with the second question first, because it's just a little bit shorter of an answer. Newsletters, blogs. The Rails has like a This Week in Rails newsletter that's hosted on Hey, or the Hey World or whatever, that just came out or has been around for a while. They just started posting again. That's how I stay up to date. I subscribe to like Ruby Weekly, Ruby Radar, Hotwire Summer from Matt Swanson, my own newsletter, and we all kind of pick and choose from each other too, right? So there's a lot that you can learn from that. And being on Twitter is where I get a lot of like the stuff that's about to be released. But if you really want to dive in, follow Rails on GitHub, like do the follow thing or the watching, sorry. You'll get a lot of notifications, but you will be on top of it for sure. How do you remember the algorithms and stuff that you developed in the past? This is a tricky subject because you don't ever want to write an algorithm or proprietary code for one company and then publish it online without permission or bring it to your next job. You want to remember the tools and techniques that you learned and picked up while building that algorithm, so you can share that with the world. But you can't really copy and paste, particularly an algorithm, into a future interview or something that you learned or something that you built unless you get written permission from them. And that's not legal advice. You'll probably need a lot more than written permission, but like, don't take code from old employers and use it in the future. What I do recommend is that night when you come home, or that Friday or that weekend, write about your problem that you were solving and write about the solution that you came up with, and see if you can rewrite the essence of it or the core of it, but without looking at your old code. You're allowed to bring whatever's in your head all around with you. No one's going to stop you from doing that. But as soon as you start copying and pasting code, you run into a very big risk of stealing your company's proprietary information, your intellectual property, which you do not want to get down. Again, this isn't legal advice, but just like, don't even do that. Don't even look at it. Blog about what you learned and how you learned it, not about the actual implementation. That's my slight, advice there to just keeping yourself safe. And don't quote me on any of this because, again, this is not legal advice, but I'm just trying to make sure you understand, like, you can talk about what you worked on. You can't talk about you can't copy paste the code you wrote.
Yeah, and probably your contract will emphasize that.
Yeah, for sure. Also, on that note, like when I freelance for people, I don't own any of the code that I write. It is 100% the company's code. It's explicitly called out that it is their code and that once our relationship ends, they are responsible for it, but they can do whatever they want with it. So that's usually how that works.
Yeah. How do you recommend to learn? Do you recommend to learn Ruby first or learn Ruby through doing Rails projects?
Good question. It's hard. They're so like intertwined and mixed these days. I have a hard time distinguishing sometimes what's Ruby and what's Rails. I think that learn what you need to do your job. If you're working on a Sinatra app, you should probably learn all the ins and outs of Ruby. If you're going to be working on a Rails 7 app, the actual Ruby is less important than like knowing all of the niceties you have in active support. Like .present, that's not Ruby, that's active support. I learned that recently. TIL. But I think that you don't need to figure out like, okay, let me take a Ruby course and then let me take a Rails course because I need to know those skills. I think that Rails is a really nice abstraction on top of Ruby, and Ruby is relatively easy to read and write as even a new developer. That my recommendation is to dive deep into a beginner's Rails course first and start there, because knowing Rails, you'll just kind of pick up Ruby quote on the job. And yeah, maybe you won't know all of the details of Ruby and like what the most performant method is to use in certain situations. You'll know enough to be dangerous, and you'll know enough to write some CRUD apps in Rails. And that's it. At the end of the day, that's all you really want.
Yeah. Dominic asks, how to contribute to your platform, considering most of us are beginners?
Yeah, so I don't know if I mentioned this, but RailsDevs is open source. The entire code base is available on GitHub. I think there are 70 something contributors at this point. And one of the really cool things is that 10 to 15 of those, I don't know the exact number, their first pull request to GitHub ever was to RailsDevs, the RailsDevs repo. So one of the big things that I'm pushing for, that I'm striving for with RailsDevs, is to bring more people into open source. And if you're excited and want to get started contributing to open source and RailsDevs in particular, but don't really know where to start, I have 2 tips for you. One, there is a /contribute page, which is linked, or you just go to issues and see what's there. There are issues that are flagged as good for first-time contributors. Those are usually one-liners, at least hopefully. They are things that don't require a lot of outside knowledge of the code base. It's just about like, can you make this fix? It's kind of contained. And second is that just email me or DM me, and I will help you pick out an issue. I will help you get your first PR up and running on GitHub. And I'll also do a code review in private if you don't feel like publishing it before people kind of see it. And if not, if that's like too much work for you, submit a PR and just write a ton of comments and be like, I don't know if this works. Can you help me with this? And we'll do it in public, where you can then share that with your potential employer as how you work through a pull request live. Well, not live, but online.
There's another it's another site that can give you pull requests to different open source projects that you can contribute to. I don't remember the name, but I know there is one.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about, and I also forgot the name. It was on the Ruby on Rails podcast recently. Schwab was talking about it. If we pull it up, we can link it in the YouTube notes.
Yeah. Sia asks how one can become a valuable Rails developer, asking related to recent Shopify layoff.
Yeah, I mean, that layoff was really scary. And I know that 10% of like the Rails team wasn't laid off, but 10% of the entire company was, or ish. And I know that some big names in Rails were laid off in that, and that's scary. I think that's kind of the nature of us as a society being in a scary place financially, the pandemic and all the scary stuff that's going on with that, and just companies having to cut back on stuff, and stuff sometimes means employees. I feel for all those people that were let go, and it's got to be a huge shock and just awful, and I hope that they find their next, whatever their next thing is, really soon. I'm pretty sure they were given a good severance package, word of mouth at least. So hopefully that's true, and they're able to take some time to think about what they want to do next instead of just diving into something really quick. But to answer your question directly, what I think makes a really good Rails developer is unique to Rails. Rails mentality is built for the bootstrapper. It's built for the person who kind of wants to do it all on their own, who wants to do marketing, who wants to do sales, who wants to do design, who wants to do product. And I think that having those kind of X factor, non-dev soft skills sometimes are what makes a really good developer a really great developer. You could be the best algorithm writer in the world, but if you can't translate that someone actually wants the first 3 elements of an array and not the last 3 elements of an array, you're going to have a hard time showing off your algorithm skills. And that comes down to communication skills, your written communication skills, your Zoom communication skills. Like, God, I will I've met with someone over the past 2.5 years over Zoom, like every week, I will probably never see that person in person unless I travel to the UK. And I'm in the US. That might not ever happen, and that's fine. And like those are the type of skills that are relevant, very relevant today with the remote workforce, with people not really going into offices anymore, and remote first companies, which a lot of Rails companies are right now. Being able to communicate clearly is a very highly sought after skill. And it's also something that can translate to just being a better person during a pandemic, because I don't know how many people have played like board games over the internet or had a Zoom happy hour or what have you, Jackbox games, but this is starting to become a little bit more of our way of life. And as people spread out and move further away from cities and stuff like that might be more relevant. But Rails skills itself, I go back to it. It was built for the bootstrapper. It's built for the solopreneur, but it can scale to an exit or a public offering, like the whole slogan that DHH has. I think that the most valuable skills as a Rails developer are, knowing the framework inside and out and knowing how to spin something up really quickly and something that's testable and something that works. But the most important part of that sentence is something that works. And you don't know if it works until you can talk to someone and communicate what they're looking for and what problem they're trying to solve.
Yeah, for sure. And to also tie it back to what Joe said earlier, you can go into freelancing and diversify your income, basically, because you don't depend on one employer. You now have multiple clients, so it's harder for you to lose your value, so to speak. So Joe, we're approaching time, and I know you have one more slide to show. So where could people reach out to you and learn more about what you do and RailsDevs?
Yeah. Okay, so email is up there, joe@maslotti.com, Twitter @joe_maslotti, blog maslotti.com. I always say if you can spell my last name, you can find me online. And then RailsDevs.com. I link to everything from here. My most active online presence is definitely Twitter. I'm posting more often than I should, but like multiple times a day nowadays. And that's usually where I will share things that I'm working on, kind of like tips and tricks that I'm thinking about that haven't really been published or polished. So if you want like kind of the raw feed, Twitter's the best place to go. If you want something that's more polished and more thought out and kind of taken more time to develop and percolate, my blog is the best spot. And then if you're looking to work with me directly, or if you're looking for help with any of those things, shoot me an email or a DM, and I will be sure to get back to you, and we can figure out what works best for you.